Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal Black Moon Lilith in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. And so everything leads to Pisces, you could say, if you think of the chart wheel as a cycle, that begins at Aries and ends at Pisces. And of course, when you're talking about transits, it goes again and again. It's like a never-ending cycle or circle. So, because Pisces is the last sign, it's like all of the stuff that has already happened to the other signs, it kind of like builds up, and then it's almost like everything is dumped on Pisces. And this is why Pisces is the old soul, because if you think about a soul incarnating first as an Aries, and then, because I've heard that theory that that's what happens. Who knows if it's true, but since Pisces is the last sign, that is the old soul who has been through many incarnations and finally is incarnating as the last sign of the zodiac. But there's so much, you could call it that emotional baggage. And so this is why the 12th house that Pisces rules is connected to karma, connected to the spiritual dimensions, the opposite of the so-called real world, because that's the end point, and the first house is connected to the body, so we end with the immaterial side of life. And so this can give Pisces the reputation as a sign of being rather unrealistic or, not of this world in a certain way. Impractical, you could put it. So when we talk about Black Moon Lilith, I've said this many times when I've been doing these series on Black Moon Lilith, because I've already done Lilith in each of the houses, and now I'm doing the signs. And the important thing to note is that you have your Black Moon Lilith in a house and you have it in a sign. So you're going to have to listen to both of those descriptions to blend them together and get a good handle on how this influences you. But I've just read so many different things about what Black Moon Lilith represents. Some people really emphasize or I should say sites, really emphasize the feminist angle, the rebellious woman who was Adam's first wife, I guess, before Eve. And some people emphasize more of like the Chiron or Plutonian. Well, I would say Chiron specifically, where it's kind of the suffering. And some people mention Pluto, which is kind of like the taboo. And I would say put that all together and bring up all those points. But, the Pluto angle really does seem to resonate with me because of what some of the interpretations I have read online with the various placements of Black Moon Lilith. It does seem that it most resembles Pluto in a lot of cases. So it's kind of like a type of rebellion that is geared towards removing the artifice or the facade in life and really and some of that, you could call that rebellion of not wanting to be artificial, wanting to be one's own person. But some of it is also because it's for the purpose of healing. And so those accompanying emotions that can be very difficult, like shame and anger and fear and stuff like that. Those things can be healed when the person identifies what they're actually going through, because a lot of times the reactions, distract from the true emotions that are informing those actions. So, or not really informing them, but triggering them. So let's talk about Black Moon Lilith and Pisces. We know that Pisces is a mutable water sign, and Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune has that connection to fantasy, to idealism, to spirituality, to creativity. But sometimes it's kind of like it's the moon card. The moon card in the tarot is connected to the sign of Pisces, and the same kind of keywords like creativity, emotions, but also self-deception or deception in general, addiction. These are 12th house buzzwords or keywords. So these can be things that this Black Moon Lilith, kind of brings out in the person, but it can be to extremes. I mean, in some cases, some of you may resemble Virgo more than Pisces in terms of your attitudes, because it can either go in the direction of the person being very spiritual, but also maybe kind of like floating out in the ether. And then the other one is the one that rejects spirituality, rejects that side of life, and is uber earthbound or practical, whatever you want to call it. Before I continue, I want to give a shout out to advancedastrology.com. I decided to go with them to give me some of the things to talk about when it comes to this position, because I wasn't feeling some of the other things that I was looking at. And so apparently, I think that, so from what they say in advanced astrology is that Lilith, can represent extremes, can produce extremes. So in the 12th house, there's this, this is the area of karma. And what can happen, this is one of the reasons why people who have inner planets, for instance, in the 12th house, or inner planets in Pisces can also experience this, or, like conjunctions with Neptune. This can be the person who finds that feels very fatalistic about life, that they are kind of like a victim of fate. And sometimes you will see that these people are attracted to things like astrology. And I can kind of tell when I'm dealing with people if they're like that, because they just really get super involved with all of the minutiae of astrology. But the more advanced they are with astrology, the more they're making the case that everything has been predetermined in their life. And I find that highly problematic, because they are going to find, they're going to find what they're looking for, because they're creating that reality for themselves. They say, seek and ye shall find. Well, it's also, I'm trying to paraphrase it, but you know what I mean? Like, see something in a certain way, and that shall be what you have. And the problem with that is that unless it's something that is positive, you're going to feel like you have this, like some people feel like they're cursed, or they feel like they can't catch a break, whatever you want to call it. It just permeates their basic view of themselves and of life. And it can lead them anticipating the worst all the time. And the unfortunate thing about that is that it may very well show up that way for them, and they will be, quote unquote, given that proof, when in fact it was simply because they had those expectations. Now, that kind of person can be quite prone to escapism because of their sensitivity and their enchantment with fantasy. One of the reasons why the world seems very painful to people who are like this is because reality can seem harsh compared to a fantasy version of life. And, I think a lot of people can escape, maybe not every moment of every day, but that's not an uncommon thing. You could certainly do so by watching movies or television programs. Some people take drugs or they drink to excess in order to experience, through their altered state of consciousness, a more appealing version of reality. But as we know, these substances wear off, so they're temporary. And then when they wear off, they highlight the difference between when they were under the influence and when they were sober. So in other words, it can almost make reality seem even harsher by going into that altered state that's kind of like an artificially induced altered state. So that can be one of the big things that the person finds that is problematic in their life, because they are coming from that need to do that. And that can be like an act of rebellion in itself, because the person may be like, you can't tell me what reality is. And that's true. Nobody can really tell somebody else what the real world is like. Especially if people do believe in conscious co-creation, then it stands to reason that any kind of way that people choose to live and think about their lives is valid. On the flip side, there can be this rejection of anything that is spiritual, and the overemphasis of the material. And I have witnessed this a lot now. Who knows if the people I'm witnessing have this placement, but it's important to note that there are different things that could produce the same type of influence. So that's one of the reasons why it's not so easy you can't just look at one influence and say, oh, that's going to be everything, because you have to take into account other influences that are going out, because they might modify one of your influences, or like soften it or overpower it. So with Chiron and Pisces, some people maybe, to me, it's almost like they might be afraid of anything that's mystical. And so they really emphasize the tangible things in life because it makes them feel safe, basically. Now, there are other things going on that kind of like motivate them to be like this, but that's the way to simply, to simplify discussing this, is to look at those two signs, what they represent, Pisces versus Virgo, and you can see that one represents the mystical and one represents the mundane. Virgo represents the mundane. And the rebellion can come in on either fronts. But I would say, specifically talking about the person who is very spiritual, to me, if the person grew up in a family that is either an atheist family or a maybe it's another religion, but a fundamentalist type religion that is very anti-mysticism, psychic exploration, that might be the way that person rebels, is to be the super psychic, to be the person that emphasizes it, like they go overboard because they're not going to allow somebody to control them. Like the Pisces placements and Neptune contacts, this Lilith has to be very careful in relationships, because you may have a tendency to be the patsy, to be the one who maybe you take the fall. Maybe you're blamed for things. I don't know. Maybe you were the black sheep of your family even. They didn't say anything about that here that I saw, but I would imagine so, because, did I say show? I would imagine so, because Pisces can be the victim. And the victim archetype, there's unfairness that is associated with that. Like somebody's being picked on, bullied unfairly. And this is something that can be in the dynamic of a dysfunctional family system, where one person is singled out. And usually that is the person who is the most sensitive. But sometimes also the person who is the seer, the one who can see through the illusion, and sometimes is bold enough to call out the bullshit of the family of origin that they're trying to promote as reality. But anyway, regardless, this is the person who may find themselves in relationships where they're maybe even falling in love with the wrong person. And I think in some cases that can be an act of rebellion, because one of the things that can be quite disturbing for these types of people is the idea that they have negative emotions, that they have anger, that they have, feelings of revenge or whatever. That, I guess that is connected to anger. But so what they can do sometimes, sublimating that, it can come out in different ways. And for instance, if someone grows up with a parent who's very controlling, I could see why some people end up doing certain things. Like maybe they marry the kind of person that their parents hated, that type of person. If their parent wanted them to marry somebody who's a doctor, or just like those typical superficial things that might be required, then they might get involved with, they might not even get married, and they might move in with somebody who is a drug addict. And it's like they are taking care of that person, they are supporting that person financially. And they might not even realize that they're rebelling against their parents, because they may have a genuine emotional connection to that person who they think they're in love with. So that's one way. The self-destruction can actually be a form of rebellion and trying to, be powerful, but it's a destructive way to do so. Then you have non-existent boundaries. So this is another reason why you have to be very, very cautious when proceeding in forming a relationship with someone, because you may not see the need for that and until it's too late. And it's never too late, but you know what I mean. Until there have been a lot of bad things that have happened. So being able to find a way to assert yourself is super important. This position, or placement, can be great for artists because you just naturally have that ability. And, of course, it comes in different forms for different people. So if you consider it almost like a therapeutic thing, it can help you having this placement, because obviously this particular, to have it in Pisces might be more challenging than some of the other signs, although I haven't done Scorpio yet, and I'm sure that's going to take the cake altogether. So there is a lot to be said for this on the positive side, having this placement. And I hope I didn't make it sound like, oh, it's just like so challenging. I think it depends on how conscious a person is. And that's how life is anyway. It's all about how much self-awareness you possess, because that can make all the difference in terms of how you navigate these influences. And like I said, they're competing influences. All right, well, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.